would like to say that it's true. When Marilyn first came to know me, I was a young person, and as I discovered, I was much smarter and more brilliant and more courageous then than I am now. So I'm not sure what that means. It somewhat corresponds to discovering when I came home from college that I discovered my father was smarter than the way I remembered him. So I know there's some correspondence there. I'm sure Mark Twain had something to do with that. In any case, as a very young person, I had worked in the United States Senate, and then upon graduation from college, I made a decision not to continue with the Senate, but instead to go to rabbinical school, rabbinical training. And while there, all my friends and the people that I had grown up with in summer camp, and they all decided to make Aliyah together, to go together as a group. And they went to Israel at the same time that I went to learn in the Jewish Theological Seminary. And they would write me letters. This is before the internet, before email, and they would write me these letters where we're jumping out of airplanes, we're rappelling down cliffs, we're running, we're hiking, they're outside. And I was sitting on Broadway, you know, in the seminary, and what some of you might know as a yeshiva, and studying and thinking, oh, what was I thinking? You know, I was becoming translucent. They were getting a beautiful tan. Anyway, so the second year of my studies, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go to Israel to study. At least I'll be closer with my friends, and I can open up a whole new world. And I had the background of having studied, you know, before college, even having studied in Egypt. I knew Arabic, and I knew the region, and had a lot of experience in government. And upon my arrival in Israel, this is in the summer of 1981, which would have been my second year of rabbinical training, my friends met me at the airport, and they said, "What are you doing? You know, what are you doing? Look at you. You're wearing a dark suit. You look like you haven't been out in the sun in over a year." And they look beautiful. They were wearing incredible uniforms. And so one of my friends leaned over and he said to me, "Seth, we're going to be going to Africa. You have a background in Africa. And we're going to begin to work to draw the Jews out of what was then Sudan and bring them home here to Israel, where you belong as well." And I was sympathetic to that. I had been interested in this before. I'd worked on projects like this in the government, American government. So I said to my friend, "Listen, I'd like to do that. How can I do that?" And he said, "Well, it's the army, and you can do that." I said, "Well, when will I do that?" He said, "If you're in, it's tomorrow, literally." I said, "Just like that?" And he said, "Just like that." We go to the American embassy, we register, which is understandable that Americans who are here, they register in order not to give up their citizenship, their American citizenship, which I prized above all, but that they would join the Israeli army. That's what I did. And within 24 hours, I was going through an induction line and receiving uniforms and equipment. And within less than a few days, I was training in advanced Africa Corps training and what you would recognize as paratrooper training, all with the idea of going to mostly to Sudan, sometimes to Ethiopia. And it was difficult. I mean, I was an American kid, as it were, not young, but not old. And I was with 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, Israelis, but we were all dedicated to the mission to bring these people separated from the Judaism that all of us know, separated by thousands of years, and yet desperately wanting, at a time of extreme famine and degradation and degradation by all Ethiopians. They wanted to come home to Israel, and they had such a yearning for Zion. So one of the things I would just like to highlight, especially those of you who saw this film, The Red Sea Diving Resort. I'm just going to flash onto a full screen right now because I want to see as many of you as I can when I ask this question. How many of you did see the movie? Could you just raise your hands if you saw it? You saw it? Okay. Okay, good. So, and could you raise your hands if you didn't see the movie? I just want to get an idea. Okay, a few of you didn't? Okay, I'm going to go back to speaker view right now. All right, so I want to say something to you.
Seth, you can, just an interruption, you can keep whichever view you'd like, because it won't affect everyone else.
Okay, that's great. So I want to say that there are overlapping stories here. First of all of you know anything about film and film production, which I know very little, know that sometimes great liberties are taken with the way a story is presented, especially a story as special and compelling as Operation Moses. So the first thing I just want to tell you from my own personal history is that my first 4 months going into active duty, in other words, on the ground in East Africa, in what you now know today is Sudan. It's actually a new country. It's called South Sudan. But our area of activity and operation was between the White and the Blue Nile in central eastern Sudan. And getting there is a story in and of itself. I could write a book about just getting there. Remember, this is before the internet, before cell phones, before computer usage. Getting there meant flying in circuitous routes through Greece, to Cairo, down to Khartoum, Sudan, and then taking whatever transportation you could down into the area between the White and the Blue Nile. And we did that. We did that constantly. We did do some parachute jumps, mostly when we were lifting people out with airplanes, but that was not in the movie that all of you have seen. In the movie, you see an Israeli kind of secretive team. The movie portrays them as a Mossad team. It was really just a number of soldiers, special forces. And what they were able to do is set up this diving resort as a way station to get people out of refugee camps of these Jews coming across from Ethiopia into Sudan and then taking them out by sea. That's in the movie. So I want to say my first 4 months going into active duty were the last 4 months of the Red Sea Diving Resort. So while I was there, I want all of you to know, especially those who saw the movie, it was a harrowing experience, not only for the refugees, their entire story was harrowing, but for the Israeli soldiers as well. And it had to be shut down, which you see alluded to in the movie, because for no other reason, the Israeli losses, the percentages that we were incurring were too high. 1 soldier is too high for such a thing. But these soldiers that were lost, we had deemed as losses because of the sea evacuation. And you see, even in the movie, at one point, one of the soldiers dies on the beach, and one of the Red Sea Diving Resort colleagues of mine says, "What's your name?" He couldn't psychologically, we understood each other first and foremost as Jews, and he desperately wanted to know who the name was, because it was so important to him not to lose sight of the losses incurred for the saving of life. And I think all of us know from the Mishnah, from Avot, he who saves one life, it's as if he saved a world. And to lose life, it was just beyond our comprehension. And thus we had to shut down that operation. But that doesn't mean all of Operation was a mistake. Operation Moses was not a mistake. It was the desire to save these people's lives because they were our people. And one of the things I want to make very clear, that in human history, as far as I know, and yes, I'm a rabbi, but as far as I know, as a historian, both a history of government and of civilizations and of religion, as far as I know, no nation, no people, no government has ever gone to Africa to save people's lives and to bring them out to freedom, save but the Jewish people. We are the only ones. And whatever I tell you today in the time allotted, I will tell you we have to be extremely proud that the Jewish people step forward on behalf of our own people, not necessarily of our own color. Race is not important when it comes to the Jewish people. We have people that are white, and we have people that are brown, and we have people that are tan, and we have people that are black. That was not in our consideration. Our consideration was that the Jewish people was yet again in trouble, and it was our responsibility to go there, find them, and get them home, if they so desired. And by home, we mean the land of Israel. No nation, no country ever has undertaken such a thing. In fact, the only countries I know that went to Africa, from any people, from any place, went there for purposes of extracting Black Africans for the purpose of slavery and commerce. That wasn't our purpose. And our losses reflected it, the continued desire, in spite of those losses, to bring these people home. And, you know, I could tell thousands of stories about how we would wring our hands. How can we endure given the percentages, given the risks even? And I can't tell you how many miracles. People tell me to this day, oh, I've never seen a miracle. And I say, well, you know, let's sit down. I'll tell you about some miracles. What we were able to do in spite of the odds, because we could not move an entire Israeli division there. We couldn't do it. This is at a time, this is, you know, as far as modern technology is concerned, this was almost the Stone Age. I will say, I did find humorous in this movie, just as a parenthetical aside. The head of the Mossad shows up in the desert in a full suit. I've never seen an Israeli wear a suit to anything unless it was perhaps his wedding. So I did find that as some historical inaccuracy. But otherwise, the pieces of this movie and the story that it tells was accurate enough, in the sense that we did this and no one else did it. Nobody. So I want to say a couple things in the time allotted. And Rabbi, just give me the high sign when we're coming to the end, because I have a couple things I'd like to share with you today to bring you into this, if you will, if you'd like to go there with me in my mind and in the story. And the first time I went there, I was put in a village that had relocated to the Sudanese side of the border. And I had to meet with what they call the Kes, which is a Kohen, because the village relied on him. And I was brought into the village, and I was brought into a tukul, which is a hut, to meet him. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we were talking about two different civilizations, both of us Jewish. And he wondered exactly what he should do with this white little Ashkenazi kid standing there with a couple of other soldiers. I said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I'm going to get you out of here, but I can't get you out of here unless you want to go. He said, well, let me just test you to see exactly whether you're Jewish or not. That's what he said to me. I said, okay. He said to me, do you have Shabbat? I said, yes, we do. He said, what do you do on Shabbat? I said, well, we go to the synagogue. So he was interested in that. He said, what do you do in the synagogue? I said, well, we read the Torah. He said, really? Who reads the Torah? I said, someone who's able to read the Torah. He said, oh, with us, it's only the Kohanim. I said, okay. And he was a little bit, he felt that was a little unusual. He said, well, sometimes the Levites. I said, okay, that sounds great. And I was thinking about some of the Kohanim and Levites I grew up with. They couldn't even read the Torah. So I was thinking, okay, that's fine. He said, how about kashrut? I said, yes, we do. We keep kosher. And he said, tell me about your shrita, how you slaughter. So I said, well, we all have different modes, but you know, we have to have very sharp, you know, I went through the whole thing. And he said, well, it's not exactly what we do. So I could see there was differences. So finally I said to him, listen, you're going to come with me and you're going to help me. Because if you don't come with me, an hour down that road, and I pointed down that road, I said, an hour down that road are Sudanese militia, which are called Jewry, local militia. And if I don't drag you with me, and I hope you help me, then none of us are getting out of here. None of us. And what they'll do to you when they find you, and this is the reason I'm here, is unspeakable. And if you think I'm kidding, let me tell you what happened to the other family of Jews not more than 50 years ago. And he knew. And he said, okay, I'm willing to go with you. It took us 3 days overland to get to the coast. And in those 3 days, people suffered greatly. It made me imagine what it must have been like on the Exodus from Egypt. Just the suffering that we endured in spite of the odds and knowing what could happen. It just was overwhelming. But we made it. And we made it because we were in this together. And I said to him, you know, thousands of years ago, my ancestors went north. And your ancestors went south. But we all come from the same stock. And I'm here to make sure that nothing happens to you like what has happened to us in the last 100 years and happened to you before. And I'm here not as the great white hope. I'm here as a member of your family, knowing what could happen. It was a lesson for everyone. I said, and I can't do this alone. If we work alone, we'll both die. So that was the beginning. And in the time allotted to us, Rabbi, I just want to tell you about something that happened in the third year. Just to give you an idea, because we moved from boats, overland and boats, to planes. Great movement. And you see a little bit of this in the movie, although the plane which was used in that movie was much more advanced than the planes we were using. We were using DC-3s. Some of you might remember these as C-47s. They were built for another world war over 2 generations ago, refitted. So in one of these operations, we actually moved into an area that was wooded, and it's hard to believe in the central eastern Sudan. And we had to clear places for these planes to land. And we had to move people out from refugee camps, such as you saw in the movie, if you saw it. And in doing so, you know, things happen. All kinds of accidents happen. These are in some places, these are fire zones, free fire zones, combat zones. And after whatever exchanges of fire or intimidation, and everyone wanted a piece of these refugees, because refugees were money. And to lose any refugees, whether they be from the Jewish people or any other people, is a loss of money for some of the Jewry or the militia from central eastern Sudan. And so it came a point where we had landed 7 airplanes, 7 C-47s. And we fanned out in order to protect them and to get these people in. And I was in the outer ring protecting these planes, funneling people into these planes and getting them moving. And we were packing them, you know, the expression in Hebrew was kamo sardinim, like sardines. But not for the purposes of anything but to save their lives. Because to have left anyone around would have been slavery or some form of submission and often death. And yes, people died. Yeah, they did. So my commanding officer came to me and he said, look, you're in the outer ring tonight. That means as we move in and we corral people into the airplanes, I want you to go on the last flight out. So I had a moment of panic because, still, while in my mind I was, I felt competent, but I was also frightened of being on the last flight because it's usually the flight with the stragglers and the sick and the infirm. Sometimes crates and things that just couldn't fit into any of the other flights go on the last flight, and the last flight's chaotic. And it touched some kind of a nerve in me. I thought, oh no, don't put me on the last flight. And he looked at me, he said, Frisch, get a hold of yourself. I'm trusting you. When everything is packed up, you not only make sure that everything is in that last flight, the last plane, but then you get in and you shut the door. That's in order. And I said, okay, I understand. אני מבין. המפקד, my commanding officer, אני מבין. Or as we sometimes said, خلصنا, أنا بفهم, which means enough already, I understand. So as we corralled and moved and manipulated the crowd into a little kind of a stream, if you will, and the planes were taking off one by one, and we were guarding each flight and delicate cargo. I walked over to the last flight and I put out the smudge pot. It's kind of like a marker on the field. I got into the plane in almost full darkness, one light bulb, which hadn't been changed, I'm sure, in 50 years. The floor was corrugated iron. The crates were in there, and as I said, stragglers, the people, perhaps some of the infirm, such as you could read about in the Torah coming out of Egypt. They were vulnerable. And there were just 3 or 4 soldiers on this last flight. Not enough of a team to defend anything, really. And as I kind of kipped into the airplane, I shut the door behind me with my hand. If you can imagine, just contrast this with today getting into an airport. Any of you who are still flying. Shutting the door and turning the handle, adjusting my eyes to the light, knowing that I have just the smallest of space. I sometimes describe this to my friends as the space for 1.5 laps, LAPS, of people, 1.5. And I'm exaggerating. Because the truth is, it was really only space for one person where I had maneuvered myself into. And then when my eyes adjusted, I noticed I was sharing this small space with a woman, which would have been cramped enough. And there was no movement. And the plane was beginning to take off. And then I'm looking at her and my eyes adjusting, I realized not only was she pregnant, but she had the appearance of being ready to give birth. Not that I was a doctor. So I said to her, and I didn't know the word for pregnant in Amharic. So I said to her, are you with a child? Inti Mawalid. And she said, yeah, in Amharic. So I said, in also Amharic, when? And she nodded her head. So I thought, this is not my area of expertise. So I yelled over to a chavesh, it's like a medic in the plane. I said, chavesh, yesh po isha beherion, ve'od ma toled, which means, medic, there's a woman here who's in pregnancy, she's pregnant, and she's going to give birth. So the entire plane was silent. And there's no seats in this plane, we're just packed in, like a moving van. So he says to me, okay, these words are etched on my forehead. You mean, Frisch, oze matai? Oze matayata, matai. Zot omert, haim ze miyad. Is this when? Or is this now? So I looked at her and I said, Ilan means now. She nodded. So I yelled this back to the medic. I said, I think it's now. Silence. And he says to me, Frisch, it's me, Frisch, אל תדאג, אני אגיד לך בדיוק מה לעשות. Which means, it's better in Hebrew actually. Frisch, don't worry, I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. And I can guarantee you, ladies and gentlemen, that this was so beyond my area of expertise. No matter what I thought of myself, I was unprepared. So I looked down at her and I said, now? And yes, the baby was already crowning. It's a word I didn't know till later in my life. And I held her up onto my lap as she gave birth into literally my lap and my arms. And I was confronted with a new reality. And that new reality goes like this. What the hell am I supposed to do now? Forgive my profanity. So I asked the medic. He said, you're going to have to cut the cord. I said, with what? And where? So I had grenades, smoke grenades on my webbing. And I took them off and I took the attachments, the pins off, and I pinned near the baby's tummy, and I pinned near the mother, very near to her body. And then I pinned in the middle and I cut along the middle pin. And the Chavay said, beautiful. It's like you're an OBGYN already. I said, okay, but now where do I put the baby? There's no place. There's a corrugated metal floor. There's no space even on the floor. So he said, put the baby on her where the baby was, which I did. And I just want to say that this was, people tell me that there's no miracles in the world. I look at people like they're crazy because I've seen it. So I did the only thing I knew from life. I said to her, we're about literally 15 meters above the Indian Ocean as we're flying. You know how close it is? We're below Saudi radar. The plane is turbulent because when you're that close to the ground, it rattles. And she has just experienced this birth, and I've just experienced the shock of my career and my life. So I leaned forward to her, which was not leaning that far, because we're occupying the same space. Me, her, and the baby. So I said to her, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Because I knew that I should be asking myself that. So I asked her. And she said to me the following words. I feel wonderful. My baby is born free. And we are going home. And before she kind of passed into a sleep of sorts, she said, thank you. And I said, no, thank you. So friends, I want to tell you something. This was a generation and more ago. This is 40 years ago. It was a different world. But in all that time and time before that, no people has ever done that. In Africa. No other people's done that for anyone else but the Jewish people. And I think we have a lot to be proud of because no one takes this seriously. Jewish blood, it seems cheap just all too often. But when it concerns our own, It's a brand new world, resting on what we did in the early 1980s in an Africa that's far different than it is today. But I guarantee you in the world, some things will never change. We have a lot to be proud of. And I thank you, Rabbi Levy, for letting me share that story with you at this time. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. I know you could probably share so many more stories, but that's the message as well is just so poignant. And appreciate your service for that. I appreciate what you do in general for Judaism. Again, I do see a question that came on the chat, but I'm just going to open up for everyone else that if you do have a question, feel free to unmute your mic and we'll try to catch that. Steve Meyer, I see you're waiting.
Yes, I do have a question. Once
Which one are you? How do I see you? Let me think.
So switch to gallery view, and then you should see under him when he speaks a little.
Which one is speaking? Could you raise your hand? I just want to see who you are.
I don't want my name on it.
Okay, Steve. Hi, Steve.
Hi. Here's my question.
Yeah.
I can understand why Sudan was part of the process because Ethiopia doesn't have any ports. So when the Israelis were using only boats to get the refugees out, I can understand why they had to get to Sudan. But once planes came into use, why didn't you go directly to Ethiopia? Why did you still have to go to Sudan?
That's an excellent question. And here we have to revert back to the geopolitics of the time. Sudan, south of Khartoum, was in no man's land. I mean, there were a lot of militias operating. By the way, they're still operating today. Ethiopia had, even though it was full of holes in its borders, thank God, the sovereignty of Ethiopia at the time of this famine, which creates these holes. Famine's not just the lack of food, it's a breakdown of all society. The territorial integrity, let's call it that, of Ethiopia is being protected by Cuban and East German troops. So it was virtually impossible to get, well, we did go into Ethiopia on occasion, but it was high risk and high stakes. And I'm not going to tell you, there's a double negative coming up, so I apologize, but I'm not going to tell you that we didn't tangle with German, East German and Cuban troops at the time. We did. And it was problematic.
Why didn't the Ethiopians just let the Jews leave directly? Why were they intent on keeping Jews in Ethiopia?
The government of Ethiopia at the time was a Marxist government, hence the relationship with Cuba and East Germany. And they, in addition to their age-old anti-Semitisms of the Beta Yisrael, and there were, you could go into a sociological report on that alone. But in addition to their hatred of the Jews in society and the suspicion of Jews, there was also I don't want to get into Marxist ideology, but there was this desire to tamp down amongst Jewish populations, even in the former Soviet Union, Jewish nationalism. And so for a variety of reasons between age-old hatred and newfangled late 20th century Marxist, hatred of emerging religious nationalisms, including Judaism, there was not going to be any cooperation between the government of Ethiopia, nor East Germany, nor Cuba, and the Jewish people and/or the Israeli government. It's just the way life goes.
Okay.
And we had to work around that.
And why were the refugees?
Hold on, Steve. I bet there's other people with other questions. Hold on. I'll come back to you. Buddy.
Okay, thanks.
I promise you.
You have, first of all, in the chat, you have a question. Why was there no doctor joining these trips? I know you talked about a medic.
Well, in military operations, we don't bring doctors with us. We bring medics, which if that medic could have climbed over the boxes on that last flight out, which is one of the reasons I stressed in the story that it was the last flight, I think he would have. I mean, I would have wanted him to. But, let me say this. Military life in a time of free fire combat, military life is characterized not by smoothness and transition, but it's more characterized by chaos. And I don't think I'm being a poet when I say that. I'm just narrating the reality of both what happened then and what I think happens in any military skirmish or engagement anywhere in the world at any time. It's chaotic. And I think the best antidote to chaos is improvisation. And I'll tell you that my heart and my soul were invested as best I could, even in a situation of improvisation. And thank God my soul was invested, because I don't know if I would have done this. I don't know anything about who I really would be in any other situation. I just can tell you what I did in this situation. I saw a Jew in suffering and trying to bring a new life into the world. And I thought, you know what, there's a great teaching in the Mishnah, Rabbi Mishnah Avot, b'makom she'eno ish tishtadel liot ish. In a place where there's no mensch, stand up and be counted. Stand up and stand and deliver. And I did. Literally stand and deliver. Although I didn't really stand up, I was kind of caught on the floor. So that's the answer I have to the doctor question. So so I see that someone in the chat says, from Shoshi Zohar to everyone, are you still in touch with any? And that's all I can read. Still in touch with
Any of the people you brought to Israel?
Not really today. I did stay in touch with that baby, actually, until he was around 10. I visited the house. And I should tell you the addendum to that story is that when we finally got in Israel, and it's customary after a mission like that you're escorted back to your home if you're one of the people on the mission by the military police, a form of that. And so I was taken to my house in Jerusalem, and I opened the door, and my apartment mates at the time, one of them rushed out and said, "Oh my God, you've been shot." Because they looked at my uniform and it was covered in afterburn. And I said, "No, it was just a little bit of a situation. I'll explain tomorrow." And then I was woken up the following morning because I fell asleep in my uniform. I was woken up in the following morning with a phone call from my commander, who said, "Frisch, takum kvar, get up already." And then I said, "Okay, I'm up." It was early in the morning, and he said, "Mazal tov, yesh lecha ben." And then he said, the bris, he uses a Yiddish word. He says, the bris is going to be in 8 days. Will you be there? I said, I wouldn't miss it for the world. So I did stay in contact with that family and, a few others over the years. But in recent years, I have not. I live here in America. It's a little bit more difficult to do that, even though we do visit Israel quite a bit. So, anyway.
Thank you. Lauren or Barbara, you had a question?
Actually, more of a comment, I think. I assume you're familiar with the North American Conference of Ethiopian Jews and nonprofit organization.
Yes, I am familiar with it.
And we've been donating to that organization for about 20 years. This is one of the pillows that they make. It's needlepoint. We bought a number of these pillows also from them, but it's a great organization for anybody who's not familiar with them. It's a great organization to donate. That money goes to the Ethiopian Jews that are in Israel.
Sure. By the way, I should tell you that a few years ago, my wife and I went on a rabbi mission to Israel, and we were hosted by an Ethiopian community at one of these, community centers. And I was talking to one of the young priests. They continue to have priests as well in the community, called Kesim. And I was looking at him, and he was looking at me, and he recognized me. And he was the son of the the son of the Kes that I had mentioned earlier. And he said to me, in forcing my father to realize that we had to go, it changed our lives. There was a certain breakdown of the way our culture relied on the elder leadership. And here was a young person, you, telling us that we had to move. He said, I thank you, but it did change our lives forever. So, yeah, there's some bittersweet aspects thinking back on it. And anyway, I see that Shoshi had another question. It said, how many all in all? And in the first chapters of Operation Moses, we brought out, I think 40,000, and then by the Operation Solomon, which was the next operation, brought out another 100,000. And over the years, a number of other tribal groups from the Ethiopian Jewish community have come out. They're subdivided into tribal families. Some are called Tigrayan, some are called Falashamura. And there's political problems with their absorption, some of them, and recognition of the various stages of their Jewish commitments there are. I have not been involved in that in many years. You know, as some of you may know, I'm an old man now. I haven't been in the army for many years. So I will say this: every immigration to Israel, into Israel, has been accompanied by a difficulty in absorption. Everyone. Even the Europeans who first went there, and on the part of the Sephardic Jews, and then later on, you know, in the founding of the state, the absorption of the refugees, the remnants of the European Jewish community, and then later than that, the Yemenite immigration, and the Iraqi Syrian immigration, the Libyan, the Moroccan, the Tunisian immigration. Every immigration has had difficulty in absorption without.
Even the Russians.
And Russians. Look, there have been difficulties in everyone, but in time, which is something that is a commodity, I think we all know that, the communities have begun to integrate and absorb. And today you have an intermarriage rate between the European and non-European Jewish communities at rates hovering in the 40 to 50 percentile, which gives me a lot of hope that we begin to see each other as one again. I'll tell you, when my parents first got married, my father was from a Hungarian German background, and my mother was from the Pale of settlement, the kind of Ukrainian Russian background. I mean, they were born in America, but their families came from these two different lines of Judaism, and there was a lot of suspicion in the families between these two different groups until, I believe, it was after World War II already, but until my sister, the firstborn, came around, and the families then began to recognize each other. So it takes a lot. I mean, even amongst the European Jewish ancestry. But time, I wouldn't say time heals old wounds. I would say this rabbinically: time heals wounds that are willing to be healed, and I think that's what it takes in Israel today. So,
Marilyn has a question.
Marilyn.
Not a question, but I remember through all these years when I heard you speak at the time, story you told about on a journey back to Israel where you came in, the opposing army was there, and they were inspecting
Yes.
cargo, etc.
Yes.
I maybe they would be interested. I mean, it just struck me so much that I remembered all of these years. It was
Well, yeah. So it wasn't the opposing army, and again, Rabbi, I'll try to respond to Marilyn's question, but cut me off when you need to cut me off.
I mean, now people who are, people have to gut off, they'll gut off. But I know people are very fascinated by everything you're sharing. So please feel free to.
So at one point, it was actually my last. It was the last of my 27 missions that Marilyn is referencing, and I'm amazed that you remember that. This is at a time when we actually went into Ethiopia, when Ethiopian society was really breaking down, and we had more maneuverability. It'd be like the last days of World War II, and certain countries were breaking down, and you could do things that you couldn't do earlier on. So we managed to get into Addis Ababa, which is the capital of Ethiopia at the time, and still is. And we got to an orphanage where there were children whose parents had been arrested, I guess you could say. And we made a promise to them that we would get their children out. And I had been a camp counselor before. I think that's why they selected me to be in this team. It's another case of me being Forrest Gump. I thought, well, this is the craziest mission ever, going into the heart of Addis Ababa. But we got in, and with great difficulty, and we got into the orphanage, and we took out 9 children. We found all the children that we had hoped to find, and we moved them north. We couldn't get out through the airport because the Addis Ababa airport was one of the most guarded compounds in all of Ethiopia. So we decided to move north into Gondor province, if you know your Ethiopian geography. It's like telling a Jewish person in World War II, we have to take you back to Berlin to get you out of here. And so I said to these 9 kids, we're going to play a game. You know, children love a game. And what they'd been through was amazing. In fact, getting them out of the orphanage was the easiest thing. That was a military operation. It was very militarily, we were militarily able to do that. And I said to these kids, we're going to play the survival game. And in playing the survival game, we need to move north through the mountain passes. Where once they all had been born there. Some had memories of it. So they agreed as we moved north, we moved at night, slept during the day, mostly in hidden structures, some caves. It took us 3 weeks to move north. And when we finally got to the border, I picked up my binoculars. I was known for someone carrying binoculars. It's almost a luxury. And I looked through the pass that we hoped to go through, and it was guarded. Whoever asked me about this earlier, it was guarded by Cubans and East Germans. And I put down the binoculars and I turned to the fellow soldiers I was with. I said, they're Nazis there, because they were wearing the same uniforms that Nazis were wearing in World War II. It's just so vivid to me. So they said, what should we do? I said, well, we can't go through the passes. It's impossible. I mean, we could shoot our way through, but there's more Germans and Cubans there than there are us. And so we had enough intel to know that there was a small gauge railway that went into Sudan from there that was used for trade purposes, mostly for food, which was ironic because, who exports food during a famine? But, I guess money spoke then. So we decided to board up the children in crates of potatoes, and we drugged them in order to pass them out, which was difficult for someone, again, not medically trained. I mean, I had enough training at this point to figure some of these things out. And we loaded them on the train, but we knew that we couldn't go with them. So the soldiers and we put them on the train, got them loaded. That was a story in and of itself. And we had to meet the train in Sudan, at a rail crossing in Sudan, where we knew that they would be unloaded, thinking that what was in the crates was potatoes. So we kipped our way through the bottom of a suspension bridge. And if you know what I mean by kipped our way, if you don't know, I just say that we managed to cross the bridge underneath the bridge. And so if anyone ever tells you, or underestimates basic training in the military, let me tell you, it was the only thing that really allowed us to move in that bridge, underneath the bridge. We finally made it to the other side, and we got to the rail crossing where the train with the crates were being unloaded. And again, I used my binoculars, and I realized that they were taking metal rods and sticking them through the crates in order to ensure that there was no contraband in the crates before they were being broken open. And at that moment, I called a military operation, which I'd never done before. And we surrounded the yard with very few troops, but well armed and well organized. And I grabbed the customs inspector, who was like a military official, I guess. And I told him and his colleagues to drop their weapons, drop their metal bars, and unpack the crates and take the children out. We would take the children out. And then we commandeered, so it's a nice tidy word, commandeered, truck transport to get them to be lifted out of there.
They stole the fucking trucks.
I can't hear you.
What's the language?
I can't hear you.
No, I think that was a mistake.
Okay. So I that's what I think Marilyn is referring to. It was the most harrowing. I mean, it was the last time I ever was in Ethiopia or Sudan at that stage of my life. It was the most harrowing because it was both a military operation and it was scary. When you're working with children, it's scary because these things remain with them all their lives.
Right.
But I think one of the insights I would just say is that, I was just running a videotape of that in my mind as Marilyn was asking me about it. And I haven't thought about that story, Marilyn, in years. It's a little bit like what we now know as PTSD, truthfully. Yeah, that was the scariest moment of my life. It wasn't scary because I was going to be killed. I wasn't. But because those kids were in those boxes. And it doesn't take much symbolism to recognize that, as those boxes were their lifeboats, and they could have easily just as been their coffins. And I think that remains with me to this day. So.
Rabbi Frisch, question for you, and I know Steve asked this in the chat, and I just want to add to it. So his phrased question is, why were the Jewish refugees in the camps in Sudan worth money to the Sudanese militia? And I guess for me as well, like the context of why wouldn't they care if they left?
They were worth money. I'll tell you, again, this is a geopolitical, historical piece of information, but at the same time, that is to say, simultaneous to everything I'm telling you, Saudi Arabia was building 5 military cities. And they needed workers. So you might think, well, why didn't they just hire them? I mean, they had all the money in the world, right? But that's not how business is done there. So let's take a sanitized word. Let's just say that there was a lot of buying of indentured servants. And any refugee, remember, to have a country is very important. And these refugees, they weren't really welcome in their own country, and they were less welcome on foreign soil unless someone can make a buck. And that's the history of slavery. And so why were they worth money? I would turn that around, and not to be snarky, but I'd say, why wouldn't they be worth money? People were paying good money for workers. And by the way, if you think that was only the 1980s, we can find this around the world right now. Sometimes it's called trafficking, but let's call it by its real name. It's called slavery. And we're no strangers to slavery, believe me. Not then, not now.
And I know this is, we talked about this in the past, but are there still more, this is a question from the chat. Are there any more Falashin or Shira Moras left in Ethiopia?
I don't know. Every year I think, okay, that's it. Here I am 40 years later. Okay, that's it. The last one just came out. I don't know the answer to that. I will say that, a few years ago when the United States entered Afghanistan, they found the shul in Kabul. It should be the title of some book, the shul in Kabul. And in the shul there in Kabul, there was 2 Jews, one on one floor and the other on another floor in the shul, and neither one of them would leave Afghanistan, because if one left, the other one would then, become the president of the shul. And neither one wanted the other one to be.
Right?
What?
This is not a joke.
No, it's the truth. You can actually, you could probably Google it and look for the last Jew of Afghanistan or something like that. The last synagogue. It's a true story. It's not apocryphal whatsoever. I think one of them, they finally got one to leave. And I don't know what remains of the last one, but he's the shul president. It means a lot to him. So the reason I'm even telling you this, besides its humor and its truth, is that there are always remnants wherever we have gone to, alighted, and left. So that's my answer to your question.
That's a quote from Maryland. That's in the mind, not just in Ethiopia and Sudan.
What's the quote? I'm sorry.
I said, you said there are always remnants.
Yes.
So this is from Maryland's psychology work.
Yeah. Well, Maryland's good at what she does. Let's give her the props that she deserves. She's good at what she does.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome very much.
Are there any other questions? I know we've taken a lot of your time, so I don't want If you do have a question, please do feel free to unmute your mic or quickly type it in the chat. While we wait for that, I'll just share that on Wednesday we have a, I'm going to say Egypt and Jordan tour, a virtual tour led by Steve Myrer. And these are his personal travels. He took us through Israel last time. So that's on Wednesday at 12:30. And on Friday, we have the 2019 American Pianist Award winner, Emmett Cohen again. So again, tune in for that as well. If you don't have it on your schedule, this Friday is a Shabbat to go. And if you'd like to order a Shabbat dinner, just let us know by tomorrow evening.
Rabbi, send me that link to the Egypt tour. I want to see it.
Sure. It's the same link, by the way.
Oh, really? Okay, cool.
Yeah, you'll jump on with that same link.
That'd be good.
And I just want to add to, everything that you said today. For me, I realize as you talk, and I see that there is one mic unmuted, so there's gonna be a question. But like you said, this is sort of a story that you don't talk about, and it hits you differently as you share it again. Do you feel like this has impacted, I guess, in a way, sort of choices that you've made in life since then?
Yeah, it's I think I'm gonna go for. And this is a little tongue in cheek, but at some point in my life, I'm going to do Freudian analysis and find out what's really going on inside of my brain. Because when I was telling the stories just now, and as I mentioned with regard to this last question of Marilyn's, I have different reactions 40 years later, and sometimes I replay these things at night. But I'm not. I didn't come back to a bifurcated society, such as veterans from the Vietnam era. I came back to a world that thought what I did and what we did and what we all did was a good thing. There was never that kind of questioning. It was a good thing with all of our foibles, and we had many. It was a good thing. So I just replay a lot of it in my mind because, my brain is the brain of a human being, and, we carry a lot of memory. And we carry not just suitcases, we carry steamer trunks of what's come before.
Right.
And that's a double-edged sword. It's good to have memory, right, Rabbi?
Yeah.
And it's also it's a struggle. Memory can be a struggle.
Yeah.
I'm fairly at ease, I think, with the struggle.
All right, last question. Lauren, I see you're unmuted.
I was aware that there were some Israelis killed in this whole process, but I gather from what you're saying is far more than what I'm aware of. How many were killed?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not privy to that information.
Okay.
I mean, and I guess Lauren, just that you were involved in 27 missions. I mean, I don't know how many missions there were. This obviously was.
So So I was involved in 27 missions, which is usually a timeout. In other words, at 27 missions, you're done. So I can't tell you, even if I knew, I couldn't really tell you because it's just too much for me to even think through. But fortunately, unfortunately, I watched people die, and but I also watched people live.
Right.
And on balance, it was the only choice, ein brera, it was the only, what other choice do we have? We could throw up our hands like we did in the Shoah, the so-called Holocaust, and say, oh, I didn't know. We knew. What other choice does a Jew have? You have to, given the world in which we live, are you really free to, lehiva tell me, man, you're free to not do something.
Right.
I don't think one is free to not.
It still takes a lot of courage. People like you.
Well, I'm more of a scaredy cat now. Now that
you're not.
We get older.
Your hairs, is that what it is?
I think young people have this view that nothing can ever happen.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to dissuade people. Everyone. As I said earlier, but makom she'eno ish. If step up and save your family.
Right. Lauren, you had a final comment?
Just a final comment. The comment that the woman that gave birth, your comments of what she said are so powerful And unfortunately, too many people in this country do not appreciate the freedom that we have. I thank Hashem probably every day, the fact that I was not born in Russia. My grandparents were born in Russia. I know what they went through, which is why they finally made it to the United States. And too many of us do not appreciate what we have.
True.
Yeah.
So your name is Lauren, is it?
Lauren,
L-A-U or L-O-R?
Loren.
So Lauren, I meet young people and old people and everyone in between every day, even during the time of pandemic, I meet people. And we're all part of the kind of the fabric of the way life is right now. And you never really know about freedom until it's.
But they don't know history too.
Right.
And I remember my father once saying when we were kids, I think it was when my brother became 18, and he was to register for the draft. My father said to him, I'm thankful that you weren't around in December of 1941.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just can't imagine you as doing what needed to be done. And my mother said to him, we all do what needs to be done at the moment it needs to be done. It's just like the situation will at times demand it. But I can tell you, Lauren, that when I look at my own children, one just turned 18 and one is about ready to turn 21. I can't even imagine them, defending the free world. They're kids.
Right.
And, but the world changes and we with it.
True.
We with it. I just took seriously what my parents told me, that you got to do what you got to do. And when your family is in trouble or needs your help, you respond. And I'm hoping that that's a Jewish message. That even in this day, I hope the young people that I see every day, I hope they get it. I really do. Because these things never stop. If we think Operation Moses was the last time the Jews were in trouble, we're in more trouble than I can imagine. There's to use the Yiddish, there's Soros everywhere.
That's true.
What do they say, Rabbi? Kol ha'olam kulo gesher tsar ma'od, ha'ikar hi lo lefached.
Right.
The whole world is a very narrow bridge, but the ikar, the main point, is not to be afraid.
Yeah, I think it's that might come from
Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav.
Rabbi Nachman from Breslov. Yeah.
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 It's good. Don't be afraid.
All right. Thank you so much. This was, I know you could go on. This was quite amazing what you've done, and in general, the story. So thank you so much.
Well, if I ever make it out your way, to be truthful, I don't even know where you are. I think you're in Arizona or something like that.
Yeah.
What city are you in?
Phoenix. We're in Phoenix.
Phoenix is somewhere south of Khartoum in the Sudan, as far as I know. It's what do they say? I think when I was a kid, my father used to say, do you know where Yenenvelt is? And I used to say no. And he said, it's on the other side of Yehupitz.
Exactly.
There you go. All right.
Thank you.
Sure. Take care, everyone. I'm going to press leave. If anyone wants to contact me, feel free. The website is newshulofamerica.org. I would welcome anyone if you want to email me, to talk to me, comment, come visit, please. We love it. We're as hospitable here as the Lubavitch out there. Even during a time of COVID, we have a nice place here on the balcony where we can all sit and have a glazel of tea, which is a glass of tea, and I'll give you a sugar lump that you can put in your mouth and drink the tea with. And if you don't catch that reference, then I'll teach you all about it when you come out here. How's that, Rabbi?
I love that. I just put your
That's
website.
the way of doing it.
Okay. In any case, Zygazin to everyone. Thank you so much for letting me into your lives for
Thank
today.
you.
All right.
Thank you.
All good things. All good
Yes,
things.
thank you.
Sure.
And Marilyn, thank you.